Montana Territory, 1882. The harsh crack of a bullwhip cuts through the silver moonlight as 5 shadowy riders drive 24 panic-stricken cattle across the frost-hardened meadow. From the window of her solitary homestead, Catherine Blackwood watches through her father's brass telescope, her weathered fingers steady despite the fury building in her chest. What the Raven Creek gang doesn't realize, what will prove to be their fatal miscalculation, is that the slender figure observing them isn't merely another struggling widow trying to hold onto her husband's dream in the unforgiving Western frontier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The last ember in the hearth casts Catherine's face in a deep amber glow, illuminating the scar that runs from her right temple to her jaw. A reminder from Antietam that some wounds never fully heal. At 46, her once coal-black hair now carries streaks of silver at the temples, pulled back in a tight braid that hangs between her shoulder blades. 2 decades of frontier life have etched fine lines around her grey-green eyes, but they've done nothing to diminish the extraordinary focus that once earned her the name Phantom, among Union officers who whispered about the scout who could drop a Confederate messenger at 800 yards without leaving a trace of her position. Catherine's jaw tightens as she watches the Raven Creek gang disappear into the tree line with her entire herd, 24 head of premium Hereford Angus cross that represented not just her livelihood, but her last connection to Thomas. Her late husband had selected each bloodline personally, building the small herd over 15 years of backbreaking work before pneumonia took him last winter. Now, in less than 10 minutes, everything they'd built together was vanishing into the darkness, driven by men who mistook solitude for weakness. The telescope closes with a decisive snap as Catherine moves toward the cedar trunk at the foot of her bed. Her movements are deliberate, efficient, the unhurried precision of someone whose survival once depended on patience. The worn leather hinges creak as she lifts the lid, revealing neatly folded quilts that she sets aside with reverence. Beneath them lies something few in Timber Creek County would expect to find in a widow's possession: a custom Sharps .52 caliber breech-loading rifle with brass fittings, alongside a Winchester Model 1876 in pristine condition. Catherine runs, her fingers along the Sharp's octagonal barrel, the walnut stock polished smooth by years of handling. This wasn't Thomas's weapon, as the few locals who'd seen it assumed. It had been hers since General McClellan himself presented it to her after Sharpsburg, a gesture of gratitude for intelligence that had saved thousands of Union lives. The Winchester had been Thomas's parting gift to her, his acknowledgement that the frontier demanded protection even in times of peace. She lifts the Sharps with familiar ease, checking the action with practiced hands. Most who knew Catherine Blackwood saw only a quiet widow who kept to herself, who sold excess cattle each spring, and occasionally bartered hand-stitched quilts of exceptional quality in town for supplies she couldn't produce herself. None knew of the woman who had once moved like a ghost through enemy territory, whose legendary accuracy had made her both invaluable to the Union cause and a phantom story that Confederate officers told to explain impossible losses. From a hidden compartment in the trunk's lid, Catherine retrieves a leather-bound journal filled with precisely drawn maps of the territory, detailed notes on seasonal game movements, water sources, and terrain features that no official survey had documented. Slipping it into her saddlebag alongside carefully measured ammunition, she allows herself a moment to consider what she's about to undertake. The Raven Creek gang had built a fearsome reputation across 3 territories, 8 ruthless men who'd graduated from stagecoach robbery to cattle rustling, leaving desolation and occasionally corpses in their wake. Their leader, Isaiah Coulter, was rumored to have killed 7 men in fair fights, and considerably more through less honorable means. His second, a former Confederate cavalry officer named Marcus Reed, brought military discipline to their operations, making them more organized and deadlier than typical outlaws. Catherine had observed them from a distance 3 weeks earlier, when they'd stopped in Timber Creek, recognizing the careful way they studied the nearby ranches while pretending to be simple drovers. She'd noted their well-maintained weapons, the quality of their horses, and most tellingly, the way Reed constantly scanned their surroundings with the vigilance of a man who expected pursuit. They were professionals who planned meticulously, which made their decision to steal her entire herd all the more deliberate. They hadn't just happened upon her isolated ranch. They had targeted it specifically, believing a solitary woman would be unable to respond. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupts her preparations. Through the window, Catherine recognizes the broad-shouldered silhouette of Sheriff Daniel Porter, his distinctive duster flapping against his horse's flanks as he approaches. At 35, Porter had been Timber Creek's law for barely 2 years, not nearly long enough to remember the war or know anything about Catherine beyond the quiet widow who rarely came to town. "Mrs. Blackwood," he calls out as he dismounts, removing his hat to reveal sandy hair already receding despite his relative youth. "Saw riders heading east with cattle bearing your brand. Raven Creek gang, I expect?" Catherine steps onto her porch, the Winchester held casually but visibly in her right hand. 8 riders. They took everything, including the breeding bull Thomas brought from Kentucky. Porter shifts uncomfortably, twisting his hat brim between calloused fingers. "I'm truly sorry, Mrs. Blackwood, but these men, they're not just rustlers. 2 ranchers up by Helena tried to follow them last month, both found with bullets in their backs. I'm aware of their reputation, Sheriff." Catherine's voice remains level, betraying none of the cold calculation already forming behind her eyes. "I'll send wires to Fort Harrison and the marshals in Bozeman," Porter continues, "but with the spring melt flooding the passes, help won't arrive for days. By then, your cattle will be scattered across 2 territories." "I appreciate your concern," Catherine replies, loading supplies into her saddlebags with methodical efficiency. "But I don't intend to wait for the authorities." Porter's expression shifts from sympathy to alarm as he watches her preparations. "Mrs. Blackwood, surely you don't mean to go after them yourself? These are dangerous men, killers who wouldn't hesitate to—" "To what, Sheriff?" Catherine interrupts, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. "To harm a defenseless woman? To add another victim to their tally?" Something in her tone gives Porter pause, a steel edge beneath the courteous veneer that he hasn't heard before. "I cannot in good conscience allow you to pursue armed criminals alone," he protests, though his conviction wavers as Catherine secures the Sharps rifle in a custom leather scabbard attached to her saddle. "I'm not asking for permission, Sheriff." Porter. She tightens the cinch on her dappled grey gelding with practiced hands. "I'm merely informing you of my intentions as a courtesy. At least let me organize a posse." "A posse makes noise," Catherine counters, swinging into the saddle with a fluid grace that speaks of thousands of miles ridden. "Follows obvious trails, argues about direction. I'll move faster alone." Porter studies her with growing confusion. There's something in her posture, her confidence, that doesn't align with the reserved widow he thought he knew. "They've got nearly half a day's head start," he protests, "and they're driving stolen cattle through territory they don't know." Catherine replies, adjusting her hat against the pale pre-dawn light now spreading across the eastern horizon. "Cattle that know my whistle and will balk at unfamiliar handling." The morning sun illuminates the determination in her face as she settles into the saddle. "Give me 3 days, Sheriff. If I haven't returned with my cattle by then, send whatever help you can gather." "Mrs. Blackwood," Porter says quietly, genuine concern evident beneath his professional demeanor. These men have killed for far less than 24 head of cattle. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Catherine's gaze shifts to the distant mountains, already calculating routes and timelines with practiced precision. No, Sheriff, they're thieves who haven't yet understood the gravity of their mistake. As she rides toward the eastern ridge, following signs invisible to untrained eyes, Porter watches with growing unease. There's something in her manner, a purposeful confidence that seems entirely at odds with the quiet widow she's supposed to be. The Raven Creek gang believes they've stolen cattle from a defenseless woman. Instead, they've awakened something far more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. For nearly 20 years, Catherine Blackwood had lived peacefully as a rancher's wife, and then his widow. But long before that, she had been Phantom, the most lethal scout sniper in the Union's Western Theater. And now, for the first time since Appomattox, the hunter was on the trail again. The gang was about to learn why Confederate officers had once forbidden their men from lighting fires after dusk, why they'd moved encampments at random intervals despite the inconvenience. Because when Catherine Blackwood fixed a target in her sights, the first indication of her presence was invariably the last sound her enemies ever heard. The pale morning light strengthens as Catherine guides her gelding along a rocky ridge that parallels the rustler's more obvious trail below. Years of hunting these mountains have taught her where game trails intersect, where water flows year-round, where travelers must funnel through narrow passes. The Raven Creek gang may be experienced outlaws, but they're driving tired cattle through unfamiliar country, a critical disadvantage against someone who knows every fold of this landscape. She pauses at a vantage point, raising her brass telescope to study the valley below. The gang's passage is clear to her trained eye. Broken branches, disturbed stones, the distinctive pattern of cattle being driven too quickly through soft ground. More telling are the mistakes they're already making, allowing the herd to scatter too widely, forcing them through dense underbrush rather than finding natural passages, pushing them too hard in the cool morning when cattle naturally want to graze. Poor droving, she murmurs to her gelding ghost as she tucks the telescope away. They'll exhaust the herd before nightfall at this pace. Catherine consults her journal, reviewing the detailed maps she's drawn over years of exploration. The Yazzie gang appears to be heading toward Devil's Gulch, a narrow canyon that provides the most direct route east toward the Dakota border. It's a logical choice for men unfamiliar with the territory. Obvious, straightforward, and therefore predictable. What they couldn't know is that 3 miles before the gulch entrance lies Thunder Basin, a natural amphitheater of steep rock walls and limited access points. If she can overtake them before they reach that location, the basin would provide the perfect opportunity to separate the gang from her cattle. More importantly, its acoustics and terrain would give a skilled sharpshooter unprecedented advantages. Against superior numbers, Catherine urges Ghost forward, no longer following the gang's trail, but cutting across country toward her planned interception point. The gelding responds eagerly, sure-footed on terrain too treacherous for less experienced mounts. Thomas had often marveled at her seemingly uncanny ability to navigate by landmarks invisible to others, never realizing she was applying skills honed during years of clandestine operations behind enemy lines. By midday, Catherine has gained significant ground on the rustlers. From a concealed position among wind-twisted pines, she observes the gang stopping at a stream crossing to water the increasingly exhausted cattle. Through her telescope, she conducts a careful assessment of each man, noting weapons, positioning, and the subtle indicators of hierarchy within their group. Isaiah Coulter is immediately identifiable by his distinctive red leather vest and the deference shown by the others, a tall man with a forked beard and a cavalry saber strapped alongside. A modern revolver, Beside him stands a leaner figure she recognizes as Marcus Reed from descriptions. Close-cropped grey hair, ramrod-straight posture, and the calculating gaze of a tactician evaluating his surroundings. The remaining 6 distribute themselves in a pattern that confirms military influence, structured perimeter security rather than the haphazard clustering typical of common bandits. 2 men, significantly better dressed than their companions, confer apart from the group, occasionally gesturing toward the distant mountains. Their posture and the quality of their gear mark them as different, perhaps financiers rather than active participants in the rustling operation. Most revealing is how they've arranged the cattle during this rest. Rather than allowing the exhausted animals to bunch naturally, they've separated them into smaller groups guarded by individual riders, a technique that would make it considerably more difficult for any pursuit to recover the entire herd at once. Catherine's observation continues as she formulates her strategy. These aren't simple opportunistic thieves. They're organized, disciplined, and clearly executing a predetermined plan. The presence of well-dressed participants suggests this operation extends beyond mere cattle rustling to something with financial or political dimensions she doesn't yet understand. As the gang prepares to resume their journey, Catherine notices something unexpected. One rider approaching from the east, a stranger not previously part of their group. The newcomer speaks briefly with Coulter before handing over what appears to be a sealed document. Even at this distance, Catherine notes the military bearing of the messenger, the straight spine and precise movements that mark a man with formal training. After the messenger's departure, Coulter gathers Reed and the well-dressed men for an urgent conference. Their body language suggests tension, plans altered, or timelines accelerated by whatever information the message contained. This development adds complexity to Catherine's assessment. Whatever the Raven Creek gang's ultimate purpose, it apparently involves coordination with others and adherence to specific schedules. Catherine weighs this new information carefully. Her primary objective remains recovering her cattle, but the suggestion of a larger operation raises questions she cannot ignore. If these men are part of something more organized than simple rustling, their resources and backup plans may be more substantial than she initially calculated. She retreats from her observation point as the gang resumes their journey, circling wide to maintain her position ahead of their path. Thunder Basin lies less than 4 miles ahead, the perfect location to implement the first phase of her strategy. According to her calculations, the gang will reach it by late afternoon, when slanting sunlight will create ideal conditions for what she intends. Years of hunting have taught Catherine that success depends not merely on marksmanship, but on creating circumstances that maximize advantage while minimizing risk. In her scouting days, she had often turned terrain itself into a weapon more effective than any rifle. Today, she would employ those same principles against men who believed their only threat came from behind. Reaching Thunder Basin with hours to spare, Catherine dismounts and secures Ghost in a sheltered hollow with access to water and grazing. From her saddlebags, she retrieves several small cloth pouches, specialized tools she developed during the war for creating distractions or directing quarry into predetermined positions. Each contains different combinations of natural materials, cayenne, sulfur, dried fox scent, that when strategically placed can influence cattle movement with predictable results. With methodical precision, she places these at calculated intervals along the approach to the basin, each positioned to be activated by the pressure of passing hooves. Next, she identifies and prepares her firing positions, 3 separate locations offering different angles of coverage, each with multiple retreat routes should circumstances require repositioning. At the primary position, a natural shelf of rock overlooking the basin's widest section, Catherine unpacks the Sharp's rifle and prepares it with ritual care. Each brass cartridge is inspected individually before being arranged in precise order for maximum efficiency. The telescopic sight, a custom modification rarely seen outside military circles, is secured and calibrated for distance and the specific light conditions she anticipates at the time of engagement. As shadows lengthen across Thunder Basin, Catherine makes her final preparations. She removes her dark blue riding jacket, replacing it with a buckskin shirt that blends with the surrounding landscape. From a small tin, she applies a mixture of clay and ash to her face, breaking up the recognizable human outline that even experienced fighters often forget is visible at extreme distances. The familiar routine centers her, muscle memory from countless similar operations during the war. The transformation isn't merely physical, but mental. Catherine Blackwood, widow and rancher, receding as phantom, scout and precision shooter, emerges with crystalline focus. The rumble of approaching cattle reaches her before visual confirmation, the distinctive sound of forced movement rather than voluntary migration. Catherine settles into her primary position, Sharp's rifle rested on a folded blanket, to eliminate any potential movement during critical moments. Through the telescopic sight, she tracks the first riders entering the approach to Thunder Basin. Scouts sent ahead to ensure the path is clear. What follows unfolds with the inevitable precision of a well-orchestrated symphony. The lead cattle trigger the first of Catherine's placed pouches, releasing scents that cause immediate confusion among the already exhausted animals. The herd balks, then surges forward in sudden panic, breaking from the control of their handlers and scattering in multiple directions. Through her scope, Catherine watches Isaiah Coulter curse and gesture frantically as his carefully organized drove dissolves into chaos within the confining walls of Thunder Basin. Reed attempts to restore order, his military training evident in how quickly he deploys riders to specific positions, but he's fighting both panicked animals and terrain deliberately chosen to maximize confusion. Catherine allows this chaos to build for precisely 2 minutes before implementing the next phase of her strategy. From a small tin whistle secured around her neck, the same distinctive tone she's used for years to call her cattle, she produces a pattern of sounds familiar to her herd but meaningless to the rustlers. The effect is immediate and dramatic. Several of her cattle, including the massive breeding bull, suddenly change direction, moving with purpose rather than panic toward the eastern edge of the basin, directly below Catherine's position and away from the scattered rustlers trying to regain control. "What the hell?" she hears one man shout as nearly a third of the herd suddenly moves with coordinated purpose in defiance of their efforts. The moment for direct action has arrived. Catherine draws a measured breath, holds it briefly, then exhales halfway before gently squeezing the Sharp's trigger. The rifle's report echoes through the basin as her first shot strikes precisely where intended, not at any man, but at the ground directly between 2 riders attempting to cut off the separating cattle. Stone fragments spray upward as the heavy bullet impacts the rocky soil, causing both horses to rear in alarm and throwing one rider to the ground. Before the echoes of the first shot fade, Catherine has already reloaded with practiced efficiency, her second shot striking a dead tree limb above 3 more rustlers, showering them with rotted wood and creating further confusion. Through her scope, she observes the immediate transformation in the gang's response. What had been frustration at losing control of stampeding cattle instantly becomes the more primal concern of men under fire from an unknown location. Reed's military training asserts itself as he bellows orders, directing his men to defensive positions while trying to identify the shooter's location. "Spread out," he commands. "Find where it's coming from." Catherine's third shot answers his question with deliberate misdirection, striking far to the west of her actual position, creating the impression of multiple shooters or one rapidly changing location. It's a technique she perfected during Sheridan's Shenandoah campaign, when a single scout created the impression of an entire detachment through carefully timed shots from varying positions. The psychological impact is immediate and profound. Disciplined outlaws who moments ago were confidently managing stolen cattle have transformed into hunted men, pinned down in unfavorable terrain by an unseen threat seemingly able to strike from multiple directions simultaneously. "Who the hell is out there?" One man shouts, panic evident in his voice, despite the bravado of his words. Catherine watches through her scope as Isaiah Coulter attempts to rally his increasingly disordered men. His expression reveals both fury and something less expected, genuine confusion that his carefully planned operation has dissolved so completely in less than 10 minutes. From her elevated position, Catherine observes as approximately half her cattle, responding to her familiar whistle and the natural tendency to group during chaos, have separated entirely from the rustler's control and gathered in a defensible pocket at the basin's eastern edge. The strategic objective of this first engagement has been achieved, dividing the herd to make recovery manageable while simultaneously assessing the gang's capabilities and reactions under pressure. As darkness begins to settle over Thunder Basin, Catherine withdraws from her firing position with the same ghost-like silence that once earned her name among Union officers. She leaves the Raven Creek gang in disarray, men accustomed to creating fear, now experiencing it firsthand, their carefully planned operation unraveling before they've even identified their opponent. By the time full darkness envelops the landscape, Catherine has secured her recovered cattle in a natural corral formed by a rock outcropping and fallen timber. The 11 head, including her prized breeding bull, settle quickly once removed from the chaos, animals returning to familiar handling after the stress of their abduction. From a concealed position overlooking the basin, she observes the gang's fires as they establish a defensive camp for the night. Their formation confirms her assessment. These men have military experience, arranging themselves in a protective perimeter rather than for comfort. The remaining cattle are secured in the center of their position, now guarded with heightened vigilance. Most telling is the change in their security posture. Where before they had focused primarily on potential pursuit from behind, they now maintain alert watchfulness in all directions, men who believed themselves hunters suddenly conscious of being hunted. As she prepares her own cold camp at a safe distance, Catherine reviews the day's developments in her journal, documenting observations and calculations with the same precision that once informed Union battle plans. Today's engagement confirmed several critical points: the gang's discipline under pressure, the clear military influence in their operations, and most intriguingly, the presence of well-dressed participants, suggesting financial or political dimensions to their activities. Recovering. Half her cattle represents significant progress, but Catherine's tactical assessment extends beyond simple mathematics. The psychological advantage has shifted decisively. The Raven Creek gang now faces an opponent they cannot see, whose capabilities they cannot measure, and whose purpose they can only partially comprehend. Tomorrow will bring the next phase of her operation, not merely tracking and recovery, but systematic dismantling of a criminal enterprise that appears increasingly complex with each new observation. The remaining 13 cattle represent not just personal property, but the puzzle piece that will keep the gang in place long enough for Catherine to uncover whatever larger scheme they serve. As stars emerge above the Montana wilderness, Catherine allows herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The skills that once served a nation at war have proven no less effective against men who mistook solitude for vulnerability. The hunter has returned to her element, and for the Raven Creek gang, the true reckoning has only just begun. Dawn breaks in gold and crimson streaks as Catherine pushes deeper into Blackfoot territory, terrain most white settlers avoid out of superstition or fear. For her, these lands hold no mystery, only tactical advantages. During her second year with Thomas, she had saved a Blackfoot child from drowning in the spring floods. The resulting bond with the tribe had granted her knowledge of hidden passes and ancient trails, absent from any settler's map. Catherine dismounts at a narrow creek, allowing Ghost to drink while she studies the ground. Kneeling beside a partial hoofprint, she measures its depth with practiced fingers, deeper on one side, indicating a horse carrying something heavier than a single rider. Nearby, a broken sapling and scattered droppings from the cattle confirm she's still on their trail, though the signs suggest the gang altered course shortly after leaving Thunder Basin. Heading northwest now, she murmurs to Ghost, who flicks an ear in response. Not east toward Dakota as I expected. This change in direction suggests planning beyond simple cattle theft. The northwestern territories offer fewer markets for stolen livestock but more isolated hideaways, places where men might gather for purposes requiring secrecy and time. Catherine makes a careful notation in her journal, then examines the surrounding terrain with renewed assessment. Half a mile ahead, a narrow ridge provides the perfect vantage point. With practiced efficiency, she secures Ghost in a sheltered hollow with access to grazing, then proceeds on foot, moving with the fluid grace that once allowed her to infiltrate Confederate camps undetected. Her moccasins, handcrafted to her, specifications by a Blackfoot craftsman who understood the value of silent movement, leave barely perceptible impressions in the soft earth. Reaching the ridgeline, Catherine stretches prone behind a natural barricade of wind-fallen timber and raises her telescope. The valley below reveals what she suspected. The remaining Raven Creek riders have made camp beside a rarely used trail that eventually connects to the old fur trapper route near the Canadian border. They're moving with noticeably greater caution, now maintaining proper security with men positioned at strategic locations around their perimeter. More revealing is how they've altered their cattle handling. The animals are being driven in two separate groups rather than a single herd, each under the careful watch of experienced handlers. This tactical adaptation confirms Catherine's assessment. These men aren't common thieves but disciplined operators, executing a predetermined plan. Through her telescope, she observes an unexpected detail. Two of the well-dressed men she'd noted earlier appear to be consulting maps and what looks like surveying equipment. One traces lines across a large document while occasionally referencing surrounding landmarks through brass instruments similar to those used by railroad surveyors. The other makes careful notations in a leather-bound ledger. Not just rustlers, she whispers to herself. Surveyors. This discovery transforms her understanding of the situation. Cattle theft might simply be incidental to some larger purpose, perhaps identifying routes for future operations or documenting resources throughout the territory. The presence of specialized equipment and men clearly untrained in cattle driving suggests an operation with objectives extending beyond mere livestock. Movement near Isaiah Coulter draws her attention. The gang leader appears to be in heated discussion with Marcus Reed, their body language revealing significant disagreement. Reed gestures repeatedly toward the distant mountains, while Coulter shakes his head emphatically. Catherine has observed enough military command disputes to recognize the signs of strategic disagreement. Reed likely advocating for one approach, while Coulter insists on another. As she watches, a third man approaches the arguing leaders. The surveyor with the ledger presents something to Coulter, who examines it briefly before nodding with apparent satisfaction. Whatever information it contained appears to have resolved their dispute, as Reed's posture immediately shifts from confrontation to acceptance. This interaction reveals critical information about their hierarchy. Despite Reed's military background, Coulter clearly maintains final authority, yet both defer to the specialized knowledge provided by the surveyors. Understanding this command structure provides Catherine with potential vulnerabilities to exploit, particularly the evident tension between military experience and leadership authority. Having gathered valuable intelligence, Catherine retreats from her observation position with the same ghost-like silence that marked her approach. The men below remain entirely unaware of her presence, a critical advantage she intends to maintain as long as possible. Returning to Ghost, she discovers unexpected company waiting beside her gelding, a Blackfoot scout named Swift Fox, his paint pony grazing peacefully alongside Ghost. They had met years earlier during the drowning incident, and occasional hunting expeditions together had cemented a relationship built on mutual respect rather than words. Many riders, Swift Fox states simply in carefully practiced English, bad men. Catherine nods, unsurprised by his awareness of the situation. Little occurred in these mountains without the Blackfoot knowing. They took my cattle. Swift Fox's expression remains impassive, but his eyes convey understanding. They meet others, 2 days north, many guns. This confirmation of additional forces aligns with her growing suspicion that the cattle theft serves a larger operation. How many others? 12, maybe 15. White men with soldier ways. Swift Fox makes a gesture mimicking the distinctive posture of military drilling. Building something at Devil's Teeth Canyon, the location sends a chill through Catherine that has nothing to do with the morning air. Devil's Teeth, named for the jagged rock formations that guard its entrance, sits at the convergence of 3 territorial boundaries. More importantly, it overlooks the primary route used by military supply wagons traveling between Fort Shaw and the scattered outposts monitoring the Canadian border. A perfect position for ambush or monitoring military movements. Thank you, my friend, Catherine says, reaching into her saddlebag. She offers him a small pouch of tobacco, a traditional gesture of gratitude. Have your people stay clear of Devil's Teeth for the coming days? Swift Fox accepts the tobacco with a slight nod. Already done. The elders say when Phantom hunts again, wise men watch from far away. His use of her war name confirms what she suspected. The Blackfoot had always known more about her past than any white settler. With that cryptic acknowledgement, he returns to his pony and departs as silently as he had arrived, leaving Catherine to process this new information. The involvement of additional forces changes the tactical landscape significantly. What had initially appeared to be simple cattle rustling now suggests something far more organized, perhaps reconnaissance for larger operations or preparation. For territorial incursion, Catherine consults her journal, reviewing the detailed map she's drawn of Devil's Teeth and surrounding areas. The canyon's natural configuration creates a fortress-like position nearly impossible to approach unseen, except through one feature known to very few outsiders. Years earlier, while tracking a wounded elk, she had discovered a narrow fissure in the canyon's eastern wall, barely wide enough for a single person to navigate. The crevice followed an underground waterway before opening into the canyon itself, providing concealed access to any who knew of its existence. This knowledge represents a critical advantage, but utilizing it requires immediate action. Based on Swift Fox's information, she has less than 2 days before the Raven Creek Gang rendezvous with their additional forces. If she intends to recover her remaining cattle and uncover the full scope of their operation, she must accelerate her timeline. Catherine mounts Ghost and begins moving northwest, following a route parallel to the gang's trail but utilizing terrain, features that conceal her progress. Her strategy evolves with each new piece of information, no longer simply tracking and recovery, but comprehensive intelligence gathering and targeted disruption of whatever operation these men have planned. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds gather over the western mountains, promising the spring thunderstorms common to this region. Catherine uses the approaching weather to her advantage, closing distance with the Raven Creek gang as they seek shelter in a box canyon ill-suited for containing nervous cattle during a storm. Their hasty selection of campsite reveals both unfamiliarity with the territory and deteriorating judgment resulting from her earlier intervention. The first heavy raindrops begin falling as Catherine positions herself on an elevated shelf overlooking their hastily established camp. Through sheets of rain, she observes their increasingly disorganized efforts to maintain control of the cattle while establishing proper shelter. These men's experience clearly lies in combat rather than droving, their frustration evident as the animals grow increasingly agitated with the thunder and lightning. This vulnerability presents the perfect opportunity to implement the second phase of her strategy. Rather than direct confrontation, Catherine intends to systematically dismantle their operation through precision targeting of critical resources and psychological pressure that will erode their confidence and cohesion. Securing her position beneath a rocky overhang that provides shelter from the intensifying storm, Catherine prepares the Sharps rifle with methodical precision. The driving rain creates challenging shooting conditions, but she has operated in far worse, calculating wind direction, precipitation density, and light refraction with practiced assessment. Through her telescopic sight, she identifies her first target, not any man, but the central support rope of their makeshift shelter covering supplies and ammunition. The heavy canvas strains against its moorings as wind gusts intensify, creating a predictable pattern of tension and slack that an experienced shooter can exploit. Catherine times her shot perfectly, squeezing the trigger during a momentary lull. Between thunderclaps, the Sharps report blends seamlessly with the next rumble of thunder as her bullet severs the primary support rope precisely where tension concentrates. The effect is immediate and dramatic. The entire shelter collapses, exposing critical supplies to the driving rain and creating fresh chaos among men already struggling with worsening conditions. Several riders rush to salvage what they can, particularly the ammunition and provisions now threatened by rapidly forming puddles. Catherine allows them 30 seconds of frantic activity before implementing the next element of her strategy. Her second shot strikes a strategic point near their remuda, intentionally missing the horses but impacting with sufficient force to send mud spraying and startle the already nervous animals. The horses react predictably, several breaking their picket lines and bolting despite handlers' efforts to contain them. Within moments, half the gang's mounts have scattered, forcing men to abandon other duties to pursue them through the intensifying storm. The psychological impact is precisely what Catherine intended, the culmination of a series of misfortunes that appear environmental but are actually orchestrated. First the cattle stampede at Thunder Basin, then the unexpected route change, now collapsed shelters and scattered horses during a violent storm. Each incident individually might be dismissed as bad luck, but collectively they create a mounting sense of being specifically targeted by forces beyond their control. Through her scope, Catherine observes Isaiah Coulter's growing frustration as he attempts to maintain order among increasingly demoralized men. The disciplined operation that began with such confidence less than 24 hours earlier has devolved into damage control and reaction rather than methodical execution of their plan. Most revealing is Marcus Reed's behavior. The former Confederate officer appears to be conducting a systematic assessment of their surroundings, his military training evident in how he methodically surveys potential firing positions in the ridges above. Unlike his companions focused on immediate problems, Reed recognizes the pattern of deliberate intervention. His growing awareness represents both risk and opportunity for Catherine. A worthy adversary makes for unpredictable complications, but also provides leverage for psychological manipulation. During the war, she had developed a particular specialty in targeting enemy officers, not for elimination, but for destabilization, creating uncertainty that infected entire units and undermined operational effectiveness. As darkness approaches and the storm begins to abate, Catherine prepares for the night phase of her operation. In her experience, darkness creates opportunities that daylight denies, particularly against men already unsettled by unexplained misfortune. The Raven Creek Gang will establish night watches, but their effectiveness will be compromised by exhaustion, wet conditions, and growing apprehension about unseen threats. Catherine retrieves several specialized tools from her saddlebags, items developed during her scouting days for night operations behind enemy lines. Small glass vials containing mixtures that create momentary flashes of light when broken, cotton cords soaked in compounds that burn with distinctive colors, and most importantly, a hollow reed through which specific animal calls can be perfectly mimicked at varying distances. These tools, combined with her intimate knowledge of nocturnal predator behavior in these mountains, will create the impression of multiple threats approaching from different directions throughout the night. Men who begin their watch rotation vigilant become increasingly susceptible to suggestion as hours pass. Shadows transform into advancing figures, ordinary animal sounds acquire sinister significance, and tactical judgment erodes through progressive sleep deprivation. The storm clouds break shortly after sunset, revealing a waxing moon that provides ideal illumination for Catherine's purposes, enough light to navigate efficiently but sufficient shadow to conceal precise movements. From Ghost's saddlebag, she removes a small tin of blackened cork and applies it to her face and hands, breaking up her silhouette against the night sky. Moving like a shadow across the rocky terrain, Catherine begins executing a carefully orchestrated sequence of disruptions designed to appear random while serving specific tactical objectives. A flash of light here, a distinctive sound there, each separated by unpredictable intervals and originating from different locations. Nothing directly threatening, but collectively unsettling to men attempting to maintain security in unfamiliar territory. From concealed positions, she observes the increasingly agitated responses of the night sentries. False alarms multiply as the hours progress, men reporting movements that don't exist, shadows that seem to advance and retreat, sounds that carry meaning only in their heightened imagination. Each incident requiring investigation draws resources from other responsibilities, gradually exhausting the entire group through continuous low-level stress rather than direct confrontation. By midnight, the psychological impact has become evident, even in the gang's leadership. Through her telescope, Catherine watches Isaiah Coulter emerge from his tent to personally investigate yet another sentry's alarm, his movements betraying growing fatigue and frustration. More tellingly, the careful coordination between Reed and Coulter has begun to fray, their brief interaction revealing tension as Reed questions the wisdom of continuing toward Devil's Teeth rather than securing their current position. This widening crack in their command unity represents a significant achievement in Catherine's strategy. Divided leadership inevitably leads to deteriorating operational effectiveness, particularly when facing uncertain threats and changing conditions. As false dawn approaches, Catherine withdraws to her secure camp, several ridges distant from the gang's position. The night's activities have achieved their primary objective, destabilizing the Raven Creek Gang's confidence while gathering critical intelligence about their operations and destinations. Most importantly, she has confirmed their intended rendezvous at Devil's Teeth Canyon, providing clear direction for the next phase of her operation. She makes careful notations in her journal, updating her assessment of each gang member based on observed behaviors and reactions. Isaiah Coulter maintains firm control, but shows signs of increasing strain under pressure. Marcus Reed demonstrates superior tactical awareness, but growing dissatisfaction with Coulter's leadership. The surveyors remain focused on their specialized tasks rather than general security, suggesting their role holds paramount importance to whatever awaits at Devil's Teeth. Catherine reviews her map of the canyon and surrounding terrain mentally, plotting approach routes and potential observation points. The underground passage she discovered years earlier will provide concealed access, but utilizing it effectively requires precise timing and preparation. The rendezvous Swift Fox described represents both challenge and opportunity. Additional, hostile forces complicate recovery of her remaining cattle, but also suggest something of sufficient importance to justify such resource commitment. Whatever the Raven Creek gang and their associates are planning extends far beyond simple rustling, perhaps involving territorial boundaries, military supply routes, or political machinations beyond her immediate concern. As she prepares for a few hours of necessary rest, Catherine acknowledges that her objective has evolved. Recovering her cattle remains essential, but understanding and potentially disrupting whatever operation centers at Devil's Teeth has acquired equal importance. The precision shooter who once helped shape the course of battles now finds herself tracking conspiracy rather than simply pursuing thieves. The hunter's mission has expanded, and with it, the scope of skills she must employ. Tomorrow will require not just marksmanship and tracking, but infiltration, intelligence assessment, and strategic intervention against forces whose ultimate purpose remains concealed behind the smokescreen of simple cattle theft. Catherine checks her weapons one final time before allowing herself 3 hours of carefully measured sleep. The Sharps and Winchester rest within immediate reach, meticulously maintained despite the day's challenging conditions. 20 years of peaceful ranching may have softened her hands, but they've done nothing to diminish the lethal precision that once made Phantom a whispered legend among those who survived encountering her. The Raven Creek gang will continue toward Devil's Teeth at first light, unaware they travel not as hunters but as quarry, their every movement observed, their vulnerabilities catalogued, their confidence eroding with each passing hour. For a predator of Catherine's experience, their increasing disarray represents not just tactical advantage, but confirmation of strategic success. The game has only begun, but already the outcome seems increasingly certain. Men who mistook solitude for weakness would learn the costly lesson that others before them had paid for with their lives. The most dangerous opponent is the one you never see coming until it's already too late. The first golden light of morning reveals a transformed landscape. Overnight, the storm has left the earth soft and receptive, perfect for tracking. More valuable to Catherine, it has erased any traces of her night maneuvers, allowing her to begin this new day as a ghost once more. She breaks camp with practiced efficiency, leaving no evidence of her presence beyond a single depression in the grass where Ghost had stood. Today's objective is clear: reach Devil's Teeth Canyon ahead of the Raven Creek gang to assess the mysterious construction Swift Fox mentioned and position herself advantageously before their arrival. The underground passage she discovered years ago will provide access, but timing is critical. The narrow fissure becomes impassable during spring melt if the water level rises too high. Rather than following the gang directly, Catherine charts a wide arc northward, utilizing a series of elevated ridges that allow periodic observation while covering ground twice as quickly as men driving exhausted cattle through unfamiliar terrain. By mid-morning, she's gained nearly 5 miles on her quarry. At a sheltered overlook, Catherine pauses to study the Raven Creek gang through her telescope. Their formation has tightened considerably, clear evidence of Marcus Reed's influence overriding Coulter's leadership. The cattle now move in a single controlled group with riders positioned at strategic intervals. Most tellingly, they've established proper scout positions ahead and behind the main party rather than simply driving forward as before. Learning from their mistakes, Catherine murmurs appreciatively. A worthy opponent makes for a more satisfying challenge. What interests her most is the changed dynamic between the surveyors and the gang's leadership. Where before they operated somewhat independently, now they ride centrally, their equipment protected by the group's most experienced fighters. This new arrangement suggests their purpose has gained priority as they near their destination. Catherine continues her parallel journey, stopping occasionally to confirm landmarks against her. Journal maps. By early afternoon, she catches her first glimpse of Devil's Teeth, jagged stone formations rising like fangs from the canyon rim, their surfaces gleaming with moisture from the previous night's storm. The canyon itself cuts a winding path through ancient stone, its walls rising nearly 300 feet in places. From her elevated position, Catherine can see the northern entrance where Swift Fox indicated unusual activity. Through her telescope, she observes what appears to be a recently established camp, more permanent than a temporary stopover would require, with several canvas structures arranged in military precision. Most concerning is what stands in the center of this encampment. A partially constructed wooden scaffold rising above the canyon floor, positioned to overlook the primary trail running through the passage below. The structure resembles nothing so much as a firing platform, designed to provide elevated positions for multiple shooters commanding the entire canyon thoroughfare. Not surveyors, Catherine realizes with sudden clarity. Engineers. The purpose of the Raven Creek operation crystallizes in her mind. This isn't about cattle rustling or even territorial mapping. They're constructing an ambush position overlooking the primary supply route between Fort Shaw and the border outposts, a perfect location to intercept military shipments or control passage through 3 territorial boundaries. But why? Simple. Banditry seemed an inadequate explanation for such elaborate preparation. The military precision of their camp, the specialized personnel, the careful timing, all pointed to something with objectives beyond mere theft. Something with political implications. Catherine adjusts her plans accordingly. Simple recovery of her cattle remains important, but understanding the full scope of this operation has acquired new urgency. If these men intend to establish a permanent position-controlling access through Devil's Teeth, the implications extend far beyond her personal concerns. She locates the concealed entrance to the underground passage exactly where her journal indicated, a narrow fissure in the eastern canyon wall, partially obscured by a rockfall that appeared natural to casual observation. The spring melt has increased water flow, but not enough to render the passage impassable. Securing Ghost in a sheltered hollow with sufficient grazing, Catherine prepares for underground infiltration. From her saddlebags, she retrieves several items essential for what lies ahead. A small brass lantern with adjustable shutter designed for controlled illumination, tightly wrapped packets of dried beef and hardtack, and most importantly, a waxed leather pouch containing matches that would light even when wet. Years of scouting had taught her to prepare for extended operations without resupply. Catherine secures her Winchester across her back and tucks a Remington Model 1875 revolver into her belt. The close quarters of the underground passage making the longer Sharp's rifle impractical. With careful movements, she navigates the narrow fissure, descending into darkness as cool, damp air envelopes her. The passage runs for nearly half a mile, following an underground stream that has carved its way through limestone over centuries. In places, the ceiling drops so low Catherine must crouch, In others, the pathway narrows until her shoulders nearly touch both walls. Water sometimes reaches her knees, the spring melt, raising levels higher than during her previous explorations. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, Catherine notices a change in the air, slightly warmer, carrying scents of wood smoke and coffee. The passage is nearing its exit into the canyon. She extinguishes her lantern and proceeds by touch alone, her eyes gradually adjusting to the faint light filtering through what appears to be a curtain of vegetation ahead. Reaching the opening, Catherine parts the hanging moss just enough to observe without disturbing its natural appearance. The view confirms what she glimpsed from above, a military-style encampment centered around the wooden scaffold, now clearly identifiable as a firing platform capable of supporting at least 6 riflemen simultaneously. The position commands complete coverage of the canyon floor, with additional structures suggesting accommodation for at least 15 men. More revealing are the occupants, 12 men moving with the precise coordination of formal military training. Rather than the individualistic patterns of typical outlaws, their uniforms aren't current army issue, but neither are they civilian clothing. The blue-grey jackets with distinctive gold buttons spark recognition in Catherine's memory, the unofficial uniform adopted by remnants of Quantrill's raiders in the years following the war, men who never accepted surrender and continued fighting. As irregular forces, the Kansas-Missouri border conflicts had supposedly ended years ago, yet here were men bearing their unmistakable insignia, establishing a fortified position hundreds of miles from their traditional territory. The implications were disturbing. Organized irregular forces operating across territorial boundaries suggested coordination beyond simple banditry. Catherine observes them for nearly an hour, documenting movements, identifying leadership, cataloging weapons and supplies. Unlike the Raven Creek gang, these men maintain military discipline, regular sentry rotations, assigned responsibilities, and clear command structure under a broad-shouldered officer whose scarred face and missing left hand mark him as a veteran of serious combat. Most concerning is what occupies the largest tent, a table covered with maps and documents, surrounded by 4 men engaged in intense discussion. Through her telescope, Catherine can make out survey markers and elevations typical of military planning, rather than simple navigation. Whatever operation these men are preparing extends well beyond this canyon. The sound of approaching riders interrupts her observation. Withdrawing deeper into the passageway, Catherine listens as horses enter the canyon from the southern approach, the Raven Creek gang arriving hours earlier than she anticipated, having apparently pushed their pace despite exhausted cattle and from her concealed position, she observes the reunification of forces. Isaiah Coulter dismounts first, approaching the scarred commander with a familiarity suggesting previous association. The two embrace briefly before turning their attention to the surveyors, who immediately produce their documents for inspection. The cattle, Catherine's cattle, are herded into a natural pen formed by the canyon walls and hastily constructed. Barriers. 13 head remain, her prize-breeding bull among them, all showing signs of exhaustion from forced travel. The animal's condition ignites fresh anger, but Catherine subdues the emotion. Professional assessment must override personal feeling if she is to succeed against such numbers. The combined forces now total 20 men, 8 from the Raven Creek gang and 12 already established in the canyon. Their weapons represent significant firepower, repeating rifles, multiple revolvers per man, and what appears to be a Gatling gun partially covered by canvas near the firing platform. This level of armament suggests preparation for engagement with formal military forces, rather than simple defense against pursuit. As darkness approaches, Catherine withdraws deeper into the passage to consider her options. Direct confrontation against such numbers would be suicidal, regardless of her skill. Yet the presence of organized, irregular forces establishing what appears to be a permanent defensive position demands response beyond simple cattle recovery. Tio. Construction of their firing platform indicates they anticipate specific action along the canyon trail, likely targeting the military supply convoy scheduled to pass through Devil's Teeth in 3 days, according to the regular rotation Catherine had documented in her journal. If these men intercept that shipment, they'll acquire not just supplies, but potentially weapons and ammunition that would dramatically increase their operational capability. Catherine reviews the canyon layout in her journal, planning potential approaches. The firing platform presents both problem and opportunity, its elevated position providing commanding coverage of the canyon, but also creating a critical vulnerability if neutralized. Eliminating that advantage would significantly reduce their tactical superiority. As full night settles over Devil's Teeth, Catherine carefully repositions herself near the passage entrance, resuming observation of the combined forces. The camp has established typical night security, rotating sentries, maintained fires, and regular patrols. However, they've made a critical oversight, assuming the sheer cliffs provide natural security and focusing their vigilance on the canyon entrances rather than the walls themselves. This error provides Catherine her first advantage. Using the concealment of darkness and her knowledge of the canyon's geological features, she could potentially access positions above their encampment without detection. From there, precise shooting could eliminate key vulnerabilities, not men, but critical infrastructure supporting their operation. She spends the next hour documenting sentry positions and patrol patterns, identifying a 20-minute window when movement along the eastern wall would remain unobserved. This opportunity, combined with her specialized knowledge of the passage, creates a narrow but viable path to action. Returning to Ghost shortly before midnight, Catherine prepares for what she knows must be a decisive operation. From her saddlebags, she retrieves several items that hadn't seen use since her scouting days. Small pouches containing different compositions designed for specific effects. Some would create billowing smoke when activated. Others produce distinctive sounds that carry across terrain, all intended to create impression of multiple threats from different directions. Most valuable is a small tin containing 4 specially prepared cartridges for her Sharps rifle, rounds modified with a mixture she'd developed during the war that burned with intense heat upon impact. Originally designed to disable artillery pieces without explosive force, they could serve an equally valuable purpose against wooden structures. Catherine secures Ghost in a protected hollow with access to water and sufficient grazing to sustain him for 2 days if necessary. After checking her weapons one final time, she begins her approach to the canyon's eastern rim, utilizing natural terrain features that provide concealment from sentries below. The waxing moon provides sufficient illumination for navigation while maintaining adequate shadow for concealment, perfect conditions for what she intends. By 1 o'clock, Catherine has established a position on the canyon's eastern rim, directly above the firing platform, but concealed behind natural rock formations. From this elevation, she has clear sightlines to critical elements of their operation: the firing platform itself, the supply tent containing ammunition, and most importantly, the central command tent, where leaders gather to review their plans. The distance, approximately 200 yards across the canyon, presents no challenge to someone who routinely made accurate shots at 4 times that range during the war. Catherine assembles the Sharps rifle with practiced efficiency, calibrating its telescopic sight for the specific conditions of humidity, temperature, and wind velocity. Before taking any offensive action, however, she conducts thorough observation of their night operations, documenting guard rotations, identifying key personnel, and, most critically, locating her cattle within their defensive perimeter. The gathering in the command tent provides valuable intelligence. Through her scope, Catherine can see Isaiah Coulter and Marcus Reed conferring with the scarred commander and what appears to be his lieutenant. 4 men bent over maps spread across a field table. Their discussion appears intense, with occasional gestures toward the firing platform and the canyon's northern entrance. This concentration of leadership presents a tempting target, but Catherine restrains the impulse. Eliminating commanders would create immediate chaos, but leave intact the infrastructure of their operation. Her objective requires more strategic thinking, not just disruption, but systematic dismantling of their capability while creating opportunity for cattle recovery. The firing platform represents their most significant tactical advantage and, consequently, their greatest vulnerability. Its wooden construction, still incomplete in sections, makes it susceptible to precisely the specialized ammunition Catherine carries. Destroying it would eliminate their primary defensive position while creating significant psychological impact, demonstrating that nowhere in the canyon provides true security. Catherine loads the first of her specialized rounds into the sharps, adjusting her position for optimal firing angle. The timing must be perfect, coordinated with natural sounds that would partially mask her shot while maximizing confusion from its effect. She waits patiently as a night breeze begins to strengthen, creating movement among the canvas tents and generating ambient noise that will help conceal her location. When conditions align perfectly, Catherine takes a measured breath, holds it briefly, then exhales halfway before squeezing the trigger with practiced precision. The sharps report echoes across the canyon, but before any man can react to the sound, her specialized round strikes the central support beam of the firing platform. The effect is immediate and dramatic. The round embeds itself in the wooden beam and ignites, creating intense, localized heat that rapidly spreads to surrounding timbers. Within seconds, flames begin climbing the structure, accelerated by the pitch-soaked pine used in its construction. Shouts of alarm erupt throughout the camp as men rush to address this unexpected threat. Catherine allows them exactly 45 seconds of frantic activity before implementing the second phase of her strategy. Her next shot targets the canvas supply tent, the specialized round igniting material with similar effect and creating a secondary fire at the opposite end of their encampment. The psychological impact is precisely what she intended. The impression of coordinated attack from multiple directions simultaneously rather than a single shooter. Men rush in different directions, their disciplined response deteriorating as conflicting priorities compete for attention. Catherine's third shot exploits this growing confusion, striking a stack of wooden crates visible near their makeshift corral. The resulting fire creates the perfect disturbance to agitate her cattle, animals already unsettled by unfamiliar handlers, now confronted with nearby flames and shouting men. The predictable result unfolds below as the cattle break through their hastily constructed barriers, scattering in multiple directions with particular concentration toward the northern canyon exit, where the ground rises gradually rather than presenting sheer walls. Several men attempt to intercept them, but are hampered by the growing fires and general chaos. From her elevated position, Catherine produces her tin whistle, sounding the distinctive pattern that her cattle recognize. The same signal she's used for years to call them home. The effect is immediate. Several animals, including her prized breeding bull, change direction in response to the familiar sound, moving purposefully toward the eastern wall near where the underground passage emerges, while the combined forces struggle with multiple crises, spreading fires, escaping cattle, and the uncertainty of attack from unknown directions. Catherine implements the final element of her strategy. Retrieving the small pouches from her jacket, she activates several smoke compositions and positions them to create the impression of multiple attackers moving along both canyon rims. The billowing smoke, combined with occasional rifle shots, carefully timed to suggest different firing positions, completes the illusion of coordinated assault by superior numbers rather than a single opponent. Through her scope, Catherine observes the progressive deterioration of their command cohesion, Gazea Coulter and the scarred commander shouting contradictory orders while Marcus Reed attempts to organize defensive positions against an enemy that exists primarily in their imagination. With the diversion firmly established, Catherine withdraws from her firing position and makes her way swiftly but carefully to the concealed entrance of the underground passage. The timing is critical. She must reach the canyon floor and secure her cattle before the combined forces regain organizational control. The descent through the passage takes less than 15 minutes at her accelerated pace. Emerging from the concealed opening, Catherine finds 8 of her cattle gathered nearby, responding to her earlier whistle signals. Among them stands her breeding bull, its distinctive white face immediately recognizable even in the limited moonlight. Using the continuing chaos as cover, Catherine guides her recovered cattle along the eastern wall toward a narrow gap that provides access to a secondary ravine leading away from the canyon. Her intimate knowledge of the terrain, painstakingly documented in her journal over years of exploration, provides escape routes unknown to men who see only the obvious paths. By the time the combined forces begin to re-establish control over their camp, Catherine and her recovered cattle are already half a mile distant, moving steadily through terrain that conceals their passage from potential pursuit. Behind them, the glow of multiple fires illuminates Devil's Teeth Canyon, marking the systematic dismantling of carefully laid plans by a single opponent they never saw. The night's operation has yielded success beyond mere cattle recovery. 8 of her 13 remaining animals secured, critical infrastructure destroyed, and most importantly, intelligence gathered about an operation with implications extending far beyond her personal concerns. Whatever these men planned regarding the upcoming military convoy has been significantly disrupted, buying time for proper authorities to be notified. As Catherine guides her cattle through the moonlit landscape, she allows herself a moment of professional satisfaction. The skills that once served a nation at war have proven equally effective against men who mistook solitude for vulnerability. The widow they dismissed as defenseless has reduced their ambush position to flames and confusion, without firing a single shot directly at any man, yet her mission remains incomplete. 5 cattle still remain in their possession, and more importantly, the combined forces represent an organized threat beyond simple banditry. The documents she glimpsed in their command tent suggested coordination that likely extends to territorial authorities or political interests beyond these 20 men. Dawn approaches as Catherine secures her recovered cattle in a hidden valley 3 miles from Devil's Teeth, a natural enclosure with water and grazing sufficient for several days. The animals, exhausted from their ordeal, settle quickly into the familiar routine of her handling, content to rest after their forced journey. For Catherine, however, rest remains distant. The night's success represents only the first phase of what has evolved from simple pursuit into something far more complex, uncovering the full scope of an operation with potential consequences for the entire territory. Before seeking proper authorities, she needs conclusive evidence of their intentions and, most crucially, identification of whoever orchestrates their activities from beyond the canyon. The hunter's work has only begun, and the true challenge lies not in recovering property but in exposing conspiracy. Whatever awaits in Devil's Teeth Canyon when she returns will test even the legendary skills of Phantom against opponents now alert to her presence and determined to eliminate the unseen threat that has dismantled their carefully constructed plans. The rising sun finds Catherine 5 miles from Devil's Teeth, guiding her recovered cattle through a narrow valley known only to Blackfoot hunters and herself. The 8 animals move steadily despite their exhaustion, responding to her familiar handling after days of harsh treatment. The breeding bull, Thomas had named him Samson, walks closest to her, occasionally turning his massive head as if ensuring she remains nearby. "Almost there," she murmurs, more for her own benefit than the cattle's. The hidden meadow she seeks lies just beyond the next ridge, a natural enclosure with spring water and lush grass where the animals can safely recover while she completes what has evolved into a mission far beyond simple property recovery. The meadow appears as she remembers, a pocket of verdant green, nestled between protective stone walls, invisible from casual observation, yet spacious enough for twice her current herd. Catherine guides the cattle through a narrow entrance, barely wide enough for Samson's broad shoulders, then secures the passage with deadfall she had prepared years earlier for corralling elk during hunting expeditions. With her cattle temporarily safe, Catherine allows herself a moment to assess her physical condition. 36 hours without proper rest has begun extracting its toll even from someone accustomed to extended operations. Her right shoulder aches from the sharp's recoil, and a deep scratch along her left forearm from the underground passage requires attention. From her saddlebag, she retrieves a small tin of salve, a mixture of bearberry and spruce resin prepared by a Blackfoot healer who had once taught her their traditional medicines. The ointment stings briefly as she applies it to the wound, but the familiar herbal scent brings comfort beyond physical healing. "I'll return," she tells the cattle, checking their enclosure one final time. "Stay quiet." Catherine mounts Ghost and sets course for a ridgeline offering clear observation of both the northern supply route and Devil's Teeth Canyon. The military convoy Swift Fox mentioned will pass within the next 2 days. Potential targets for whatever operation the combined forces were planning before her intervention. Despite her successful disruption, she cannot assume they've abandoned their larger objective, particularly with 5 remaining cattle, potentially providing motivation for pursuit. Reaching a concealed observation point by mid-morning, Catherine studies the canyon through her telescope. The devastation wrought by her night assault is clearly visible. The firing platform reduced to charred timber, supply tents collapsed, and general disarray throughout the camp. More importantly, she observes frantic activity, suggesting they're attempting to salvage their operation despite significant setbacks. The scarred commander appears to be directing reconstruction of essential elements, while Isaiah Coulter and several riders prepare for departure. Their urgency suggests not retreat, but adaptation, modifying plans rather than abandoning them in the face of unexpected resistance. Most concerning is what Catherine observes in the central command tent, now relocated after the fire. Through her telescope, she can see Marcus Reed and the surveyors huddled over salvaged maps, their intensity suggesting contingency planning rather than withdrawal. These men aren't relinquishing their objective, merely adjusting their approach. Professionals, Catherine acknowledges with grudging respect. Amateur bandits would have scattered after such comprehensive disruption. These men maintain discipline and purpose despite significant setbacks, the hallmark of military training and larger motivation than simple profit. The departure of Coulter with 4 riders draws her particular attention. They exit the northern canyon entrance without cattle, moving with purpose that suggests time-sensitive objectives rather than random flight. Through her telescope, Catherine studies their loaded saddlebags and additional weapons, preparations for specific action. Rather than simple travel, the possibilities crystallize in her tactical assessment. If the firing platform was intended to ambush the approaching military convoy, its destruction would necessitate alternative methods, perhaps direct interception at a different location rather than the original fixed position strategy. Coulter's small force would be perfect for such adaptation, mobile, well-armed, and capable of executing precision attacks without the logistical burden of larger numbers. Catherine consults her journal, reviewing the detailed maps she's drawn of supply, routes throughout the territory. The military convoy would follow the established trail through Butler's Pass before descending toward Devil's Teeth, a predictable path that presented limited alternative routes due to spring flooding in the lowlands. But there was one critical vulnerability: a narrow bridge spanning Jackknife Creek approximately 15 miles north. The wooden structure, barely wide enough for a single wagon, created a natural choke point where even a small force could effectively ambush larger numbers caught in single-file crossing. The bridge, Catherine murmurs, understanding dawning. With cold clarity, they're shifting to the bridge. This realization demands immediate action. Disabling their firing platform had eliminated one threat, but if Coulter's group successfully ambushes the convoy at Jackknife Bridge, they'll obtain whatever weapons and supplies they sought from the beginning, potentially including the Gatling gun ammunition she had observed in their inventory records during her night observations. Catherine checks her weapons and provisions, calculating distances and timing with military precision. 15 miles to the bridge meant 3 hours hard riding for someone who knew the terrain as she did. Ghost was trail-worn, but capable of sustained effort when required. More challenging would be arriving with sufficient time to counter whatever preparations Coulter implemented for the ambush. With resolute efficiency, Catherine secures her telescope and mounts Ghost, setting course northwest toward Jackknife Creek. Rather than following established trails, she cuts across country, utilizing ridgelines and dry creek beds that offer more direct routes invisible to conventional travelers. The terrain demands technical riding, steep descents, narrow passages between rock formations, occasional stretches where Ghost must be led rather than ridden. By early afternoon, Catherine reaches an elevated position overlooking Jackknife Creek and its critical bridge. The wooden structure spans approximately 60 feet across a spring-swollen waterway, its weathered planks barely wide enough for military wagons to cross individually. The approaches on both sides present minimal cover, open ground for nearly 100 yards that would leave crossing forces exposed during the vulnerable transition from solid ground to narrow bridge. Through her telescope, Catherine confirms her suspicion. Isaiah Coulter and his 4 men have already established positions on the northern approach, concealed within a natural depression that provides perfect firing angles toward anyone crossing from the south. Their preparation appears methodical. Rifle positions already established, horses concealed in a nearby stand of cottonwoods, and what appears to be explosive charges being positioned at critical points along the bridge supports. Not merely ambush, but complete destruction. Their plan becomes clear as she observes their preparations. The convoy would be allowed partial crossing before detonation collapsed the bridge, trapping lead wagons on the northern bank, where Coulter's force could engage them directly, while remaining vehicles would be isolated on the southern approach. Unable to provide support across the severed span, Catherine studies the tactical situation with professional assessment. Direct confrontation against 5 entrenched men presented poor odds, even for someone of her skill. Their position provided excellent defensive coverage with minimal exposure, while approaching them would require crossing open terrain that offered no concealment. Yet time constraints eliminated elaborate counter-strategies. The military convoy would likely reach the crossing within hours, based on their typical schedule documented in her journal. Whatever action she took required immediate implementation with resources currently available. Scanning the surrounding Terrain. Catherine identifies a potential advantage. A rocky promontory extending along the eastern edge of the creek, approximately 400 yards from the bridge. The elevated position would provide clear sightlines to both the bridge and Coulter's ambush location, creating firing angles impossible to defend against from their current entrenchment. The distance presented no challenge for her Sharps rifle. With telescopic sight, during the war, she had routinely engaged targets beyond 600 yards with consistent accuracy that earned her the Phantom designation. 400 yards under favorable conditions would allow precision targeting of both personnel and their explosive components. Catherine establishes her position with practiced efficiency, creating a stable firing platform using her folded blanket and saddlebags. The afternoon sun positions itself advantageously behind her right shoulder, eliminating glare while casting subtle shadows that help define targets through her telescopic sight. Before taking offensive action, she conducts thorough reconnaissance of their preparations, identifying specific vulnerabilities in both their ambush strategy and physical positioning. The explosives present particular concern. Multiple charges positioned along bridge supports with what appears to be centralized detonation wiring leading to Coulter's position. Through her telescopic sight, Catherine observes their final preparations. Weapons. Check. Ammunition distribution, and most tellingly pocket watches repeatedly consulted, suggesting coordination with specific timing rather than opportunistic engagement. These men expect the convoy at a predetermined hour, reinforcing her assessment of sophisticated planning beyond common banditry. The tactical evaluation complete, Catherine loads the Sharps with methodical precision, selecting standard ammunition rather than her specialized incendiary rounds. The bridge requires preservation rather than destruction, eliminating her fire-starting cartridges as viable options. Instead, precision disabling of their detonation system presents the optimal strategy. Her first target identifies itself as one man emerges briefly from concealment to make final adjustments to the detonation wiring. Catherine tracks his movement through her scope, leading slightly to account for distance and minimal crosswind. The Sharps report echoes across the creek bed as her bullet severs the main detonation wire precisely where it connects to the firing mechanism. The effect is immediate. The man drops back into concealment while visible confusion erupts among the ambush party. Through her scope, Catherine observes their frantic attempts to identify her firing position while simultaneously assessing damage to their detonation system. Rather than engaging personnel directly, Catherine's second shot targets their backup mechanism, a secondary detonation box visible near Coulter's position. The heavy caliber round destroys the device completely, eliminating their ability to collapse the bridge regardless of how the confrontation unfolds. With their explosive strategy neutralized, the tactical situation transforms dramatically. Coulter's position, selected for optimal bridge coverage, now leaves them vulnerable to Catherine's elevated angle of fire. More importantly, the psychological impact of precision shooting from an unidentified location creates the same disruptive effect she exploited at Devil's Teeth. The impression of facing superior forces rather than a single opponent. Catherine maintains disciplined fire, targeting their weapon positions and equipment rather than personnel directly. Each shot eliminates specific tactical capabilities. A rifle rest shattered, ammunition boxes disabled, even canteens struck to eliminate. Water supplies during what might become extended engagement. Through her scope, she observes the deteriorating cohesion of their ambush party. What began as disciplined preparation has devolved into reactive confusion. Men seeking better cover, conflicting directives between Coulter and his seconds, and increasingly desperate attempts to locate their unseen attacker. The distant sound of wagon wheels and livestock announces the approaching convoy. 3 military wagons with mounted escorts becoming visible on the southern horizon. Catherine increases her suppressive fire, ensuring Coulter's force remains pinned down as the military unit approaches the bridge crossing. The convoy commander, a lieutenant wearing cavalry insignia visible through Catherine's telescope, immediately recognizes the tactical situation upon observing gunfire near their crossing point. With practiced efficiency, he deploys his escorts in defensive formation while halting the wagons at safe distance. The arrival of disciplined military forces completes the reversal of Coulter's ambush strategy. What began as their carefully planned attack has transformed into their own entrapment between Catherine's elevated precision fire and the organized military response approaching from the south. After brief but intense exchange of gunfire, Catherine observes white fabric rising from Coulter's position, the universal signal of surrender when facing untenable tactical disadvantage. The military escorts advance cautiously, securing prisoners while examining the disabled explosives that would have collapsed their crossing and potentially cost numerous lives. As the situation resolves below, Catherine disassembles her rifle and prepares for discreet withdrawal. Her objective, preventing the ambush and protecting the military convoy, has been accomplished without revealing her identity or direct involvement beyond anonymous supporting fire. The strategic implications extend far beyond this single confrontation. With Coulter captured and their ambush thwarted, the military now possesses both prisoners and evidence of organized operation against government forces. The conspiracy Catherine uncovered has lost critical personnel and tactical advantage in a single afternoon, yet questions remain as Catherine guides Ghost northward along concealed trails that will eventually circuit back to her hidden cattle. The surviving forces at Devil's Teeth still pose potential threat, and more importantly, the purpose behind their coordinated operation remains unclear. Simple banditry doesn't explain their level of organization, specialized personnel, or apparent political objectives suggested by the documents she glimpsed. The widow who began this journey, seeking only her stolen cattle, now finds herself entangled in conspiracy with implications beyond personal property. Whatever awaits in the final confrontation with those remaining at Devil's Teeth will determine not just recovery of her last 5 cattle, but potentially the security of the entire territory. Dusk bleeds crimson across the western sky as Catherine approaches her hidden meadow, Ghost's hoofbeats muffled by pine needles carpeting the forest floor. The gelding has performed beyond expectation, carrying her nearly 40 miles in a single day without faltering. She dismounts at the concealed entrance, muscles protesting after hours in the saddle. The recovered cattle lift their heads at her arrival, Samson's distinctive bellow recognition of her scent. Catherine allows herself a moment to appreciate this small victory. 8 of 13 animals secured, each one representing hours of Thomas's labor and dreams for their shared future. Yet the mission remains incomplete, both in cattle recovery and the larger threat she's uncovered. After tending to Ghost and ensuring the cattle remain secure, Catherine settles beneath a lodgepole pine to review what she's learned. The thwarted ambush at Jackknife Bridge confirms her assessment of organized conspiracy rather than opportunistic banditry. These men operate with military precision, adapt to setbacks with professional flexibility, and pursue objectives that suggest political rather than merely financial motivation. From her saddlebag, Catherine retrieves a folded document she'd discovered pinned beneath Coulter's saddle during a moment of opportunity before departing the bridge scene. In the fading daylight, she examines what appears to be a partial manifest, a list of weapons and supplies scheduled for delivery on the military convoy she just helped protect. One item, circled in bold ink, stands out among standard provisions: Artillery primers, 200 count, experimental percussion type. Her military experience provides immediate context. These specialized detonators would allow precise timing of artillery fire or, when applied to other explosives, coordinated detonation across multiple locations simultaneously. The technological advancement represented significant tactical advantage for whoever possessed it. Not simple bandits, Catherine murmurs, tucking the manifest into her journal. Something far more organized. The manifold implications crystallize into disturbing clarity. The Raven Creek gang and their collaborators weren't merely planning isolated ambush. They sought specific military technology with applications far beyond territorial crime. The testing she'd observed at Devil's Teeth, the surveying equipment, the coordination between multiple groups, all pointed toward orchestrated insurrection rather than random violence. Catherine allows herself 3 hours of necessary rest, condition her body while remaining alert to potential pursuit. Years of field operations had trained her to sleep efficiently, controlled restorative periods that maintained operational capability without surrendering situational awareness. Pre-dawn, light finds her alert and preparing for the final phase of her operation. The organized forces at Devil's Teeth Canyon represent both immediate threat and critical intelligence opportunity. Their remaining personnel, particularly the surveyors and scarred commander, likely possess information connecting these territorial activities to whatever larger movement orchestrates them. More personally, her final 5 cattle remain in their possession. Animals Thomas had selected individually, working 14-hour days to afford the breeding stock that would secure their ranch's future. Catherine will not abandon them, regardless of the odds. Today's approach requires different tactics. Having disrupted their operations twice through stealth and precision shooting, she anticipates heightened vigilance against similar methods. The psychological advantage of the unknown assailant has diminished with each encounter, replaced by prepared defenses against established patterns. Time to change the rules, Catherine decides, retrieving items from her saddlebags that hadn't seen use during this pursuit. A cavalry officer's coat, Union blue she'd maintained out of sentiment despite its painful associations. Brass infantry buttons that still caught sunlight despite years in storage. And most significantly, a small wooden box containing her service medals and official papers, establishing her identity as Captain Catherine Mercer, Special Reconnaissance Division. Her actual rank and designation before she'd become Catherine. Blackwood, rancher's wife. The transformation is more than cosmetic. As she dons the uniform coat and secures her hair in formal military style, Catherine consciously reclaims the authority and bearing that once commanded respect from generals. The widow seeking stolen cattle disappears entirely, replaced by the officer whose tactical assessments had shaped battle plans at Antietam and Gettysburg. Ghost seems to sense the change, standing taller as she mounts and sets course directly for Devil's Teeth Canyon. No more parallel tracking or concealed approach. Captain Mercer rides openly, her bearing projecting absolute confidence in her, authority and purpose. By mid-morning, she crests the final ridge overlooking the canyon, making no attempt to conceal her approach. Through her telescope, she observes their predictable response. Sentries alerting the camp, defensive positions hastily assumed, weapons readied against perceived threat. What they cannot anticipate is her strategy. Not stealth or deception, this. A time, but the audacity of absolute authority. Catherine adjusts her uniform coat, verifies her documentation is accessible, and rides directly toward the canyon's southern entrance, her posture projecting unmistakable military command. The sentries challenge her approach, rifles raised with professional discipline despite their irregular status. Catherine halts Ghost at precisely the correct distance, close enough to communicate but maintaining tactical advantage if engagement becomes necessary. I am Captain Catherine Mercer, Special Assignment Division, under direct authority of General Philip Sheridan, she announces, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. I am here to speak with your commanding officer regarding ongoing territorial violations and unauthorized paramilitary activities. The sentries exchange uncertain glances, confronted with unexpected direct approach rather than the ghost-like adversary they've faced previously. Before they can respond, Marcus Reed emerges from the canyon, his military bearing instantly recognizing the authentic command presence Catherine projects. Captain, he acknowledges with professional caution rather than hostility. This is unexpected. We were under impression federal forces had withdrawn from this territory during Reconstruction. Special divisions remain active where insurrection threatens territorial stability, Catherine replies without hesitation, the formal language of military protocol returning naturally after years' disuse. Your recent activities have attracted attention at levels you clearly intended to avoid. Her calculated gamble exploits a fundamental vulnerability in their operation, the need for secrecy from federal authorities. By presenting herself as official investigation rather than local resistance, she transforms their tactical calculation entirely. I believe there's been misunderstanding regarding our presence, Reed offers carefully, his Confederate officer. Background evident in how he maintains formal military courtesy despite adversarial positions. Perhaps we should discuss this matter with appropriate context. Indeed, Catherine agrees, dismounting with practiced precision. Beginning with your cooperation in returning civilian property seized without authorization and proceeding to explanation of unauthorized fortification of federal transit routes. Reed escorts her into the canyon where the scarred commander awaits, surrounded by his remaining men in defensive formation. The devastation from her night assault remains evident throughout their camp. Burned structures, disorganized equipment, men bearing injuries from falling debris or their desperate escape attempts. Commander Blackwell, the scarred man, introduces himself without offering hand or further identification. Former Major 4th Virginia Cavalry, currently private citizen engaging in territorial development activities. Currently engaged in attempted military interception of federal shipments, Catherine corrects smoothly, producing the manifest recovered from Coulter's saddle. With particular interest in experimental detonation technology, activities that constitute insurrection under current territorial statutes. The shock registering on Blackwell's face confirms her assessment. He hadn't known Coulter possessed such documentation, its recovery representing catastrophic compromise of operational security. More tellingly, his instinctive glance toward a canvas-covered wagon reveals what must be their document repository. Isaiah Coulter and 4 associates have been detained at Jackknife Bridge, Catherine continues, exploiting her advantage. The military convoy you targeted now carries both prisoners and evidence directly to Fort Shaw. My presence here represents your final opportunity for negotiated resolution before federal cavalry deployment. The bluff is calculated precisely, against their knowledge limitations, with communications disrupted by distance and her interception of Coulter's group. These men have no way to verify or disprove her assertions. The implied threat of imminent military response creates urgency that compromises rational assessment. What exactly are you proposing, Captain? Blackwell asks, his tone betraying genuine concern beneath attempted confidence. Immediate return of all civilian property, surrender of all unauthorized military equipment, and your complete withdrawal from territorial boundaries within 24 hours, Catherine states, each requirement delivered with absolute conviction of federal authority. In exchange, your remaining personnel receive safe passage rather than detention for conspiracy against government operations. The strategic application of apparent legitimacy creates the intended effect. These men, regardless of their irregular status, retain military conditioning that responds to formal authority and established protocols. The possibility of negotiated withdrawal represents preferable alternative to armed confrontation with federal forces, particularly given their already compromised position. "The cattle remain in our northern corral," Reed interjects, attempting to establish cooperative posture, "unharmed but separated from those that escaped during recent incidents. They will be returned immediately," Catherine confirms, "along with any documentation regarding your operations in this territory. Territorial authorities require complete understanding of your activities to prevent similar incursions." The psychological leverage proves decisive. Blackwell signals his lieutenants, issuing orders that balance preservation of dignity with practical recognition of untenable position. Men move with reluctant efficiency to gather the requested materials, while others retrieve Catherine's remaining cattle from the northern corral. As these activities progress, Catherine maintains her command presence while conducting careful observation of their remaining equipment and documentation. Through practiced peripheral vision, she notes maps detailing positions throughout the territory, correspondence bearing unfamiliar insignia, and most significantly, a document case bearing territorial government seals. The implications extend beyond local conspiracy to potential corruption within territorial governance, connections that would explain these men's confidence in operating so boldly across jurisdictional boundaries. That evidence presents value beyond her personal mission. Information territorial authorities and possibly federal government would require to address systemic rather than merely symptomatic threats. When her remaining 5 cattle are delivered, showing signs of harsh handling but no permanent damage, Catherine maintains professional detachment rather than revealing personal satisfaction. The animals are merely property being returned in official exchange rather than emotional reunion between rancher and livestock. "You have until sunrise tomorrow to clear territorial boundaries," she informs Blackwell as the final documentation is delivered to her. "Federal patrols will establish perimeter control by noon. Any personnel remaining will face detention under military authority rather than civilian courts." The formality of her departure maintains the illusion of official capacity. No gratitude expressed for cooperation, no acknowledgement of personal victory, merely the procedural completion of authorized intervention. Only after cresting the ridge beyond their sight does Catherine allow herself single deep breath of relief and accomplishment. The complete herd, all 24 head including Samson, moves steadily homeward under her guidance, 13 animals, from Devil's Teeth, rejoining their 8 companions from the hidden meadow. Ghost walks beside Catherine with the steady companionship that had carried her through this extraordinary pursuit. As sunset approaches, bringing symbolic closure to her remarkable 4-day operation, Catherine removes the cavalry coat and returns it to her saddlebag. The transformation reverses itself, Captain Mercer receding as Catherine Blackwood re-emerges, the widow rancher returning home with her recovered property. Yet something fundamental has changed beyond simple recovery of stolen cattle. The skills that made her legendary during war have proven equally effective in peace. The strategic mind that once directed military operations has found renewed purpose, protecting innocent civilians from organized threats. Most significantly, the compartmentalized aspects of her identity, military captain and frontier widow, have revealed themselves as complementary rather than contradictory elements of her complete self. The documents secured from Devil's Teeth will find their way to appropriate authorities through channels requiring no direct association with Catherine Blackwood. The conspiracy they reveal will face justice without compromising her privacy or peaceful existence. The widow will continue tending her ranch and cattle, yet with renewed confidence that when circumstances require, the phantom remains ready. 3 ridges from home, Catherine pauses atop a rise overlooking the valley where her modest ranch stands. Undisturbed, the setting sun illuminates the scene with golden light that Thomas had always claimed made their small holding look like paradise itself. "We made it," she tells the cattle, Samson's massive head turning toward her voice with familiar recognition. "All of us. Tomorrow there would be fences to mend, cattle to tend, and the steady rhythm of ranch life to resume. The specialized ammunition would return to its cedar chest, the journals to their hidden compartment, the telescopic sight to its protective case. Catherine Blackwood would once again become simply the quiet widow who kept to herself, and occasionally bartered exceptional quilts in town, but something would remain forever changed. The confidence that came from reclaiming not just stolen property, but the full measure of her capabilities. The Raven Creek Gang and their conspirators had intended to steal mere cattle. Instead, they had awakened something far more formidable. A legend they never saw coming until it was already too late. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.